Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm here today with our special guest, Amelia Nichole. Amelia writes clean fantasy and science fiction with epic stakes and cozy vibes. She loves intrigue, witty banter, and clean romance. She splits her time between writing, business consulting for small businesses, advocating for homeschooling, and teaching creative writing. Never found without a tall cup of tea and her trusty e-reader, she travels the U.S. with her family, searching for new inspiration. When she isn't trying to conquer her massive to-be-read list, she enjoys walking her big dog Teddy Bear, watching birds, and finding neat rocks. Welcome, Amelia. We're glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Marcus.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into it, I want to read your two truths and a lie. And this is another great opportunity for me because Brock can't be here today and I'm behind in the contest. So hopefully I get it right so I can start catching up with him. He's up on me, I think 5-3. So we'll see how it goes today. All right. So here they are. Number one, I'm an avid hiker and once hiked 20 miles to see an amazing view. Number two, my bedroom was once inside an old bank vault. And number three, I'm allergic to alfalfa hay, but want to raise sheep. So avid hiker and hike 20 miles for a view, bedroom inside a bank vault, or allergic to alfalfa. Okay, we'll see if we can work those into the conversation today. All right, so let's just start out with your story. Like, how did you get into writing?
I've kind of always been a storyteller. My parents say that even before I picked up a pencil, I was telling them all kinds of tall tales.
Mm-hmm.
But I really wrote my first full-length novel in 2010. And that rough draft became the basis for a whole series of novels that I worked on for many years. And I'm actually publishing the first one on my Web Story World website. So,
Okay, awesome. So that when you started writing that first one, was your intention to publish it someday, or was it just for fun, or what were your thoughts back then?
my goal was to be able to actually finish something. So whether I was going to publish it at the end or not, but I feel like I wrote lots of different starts of stories, kind of doodling,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. And so I wanted to actually, like, I'm going to commit, I'm actually going to finish this novel. And I'm going to, I wrote this, I didn't really do outlines. And so I wrote like a little paragraph, and it ended up just like continuing to expand as I was writing it. And then once I finished writing it, I realized the first 3 chapters really actually needed a little more backstory. So I'd add 10 chapters
Mm-hmm.
and then 20. And then pretty soon I was like, this beginning 3 chapters is now an entire novel.
So
So that's kind of how it grew into a series from there.
yeah, just kind of well, at least for me, sometimes the characters just dictate what's happening next and whether there's going to be a book two or if it needs to expand. It's not always an author's choice, I think. I think sometimes it's the characters that dictate that.
For
I don't know
sure.
if
I think a lot of it was just um, I would write something and then I'd be like, oh, I might need to give a little backstory on, like, okay, they're going to have to form an alliance, and I might need to give some backstory on why they have to form an alliance. And then
okay.
it was like, these two characters have this conflict. Oh yeah, I might need to explain that conflict. So it just keeps adding more and more. But it's been a lot of fun, and I definitely have to say there are some characters that are a little more headstrong, so to speak, than others. I just recently figured out um, one character perspective that's supposed to be through the whole series. I alternated his perspective with basically one of his, I don't want to say minions or employees, let's say. Um, and then I realized I just kept writing from that character's perspective for the next 6 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm gonna have to go back in and add some back from his name's Jaden's perspective. Uh, but
So,
those are gonna be a lot of fun.
so you decided to stick with that instead of going back and changing those chapters. You're going to go back
Add
and
more.
add Jaden. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
because I've done that before where I've switching between and I forget and I'm like, oh man, now I have to go back and change it, but instead you're adding more, which is
Yeah.
another way to handle that. So when when you finish your first book, why did you decide to write the series before you started publishing and finish that series instead of publishing one at a time?
Because that was the conclusion that I realized is that I had written book two accidentally. And
Oh,
so I
okay.
needed to write book one. And so and I really wanted it to be my best work. I was 16 when I wrote the first novel, and I'm 29 now. So it has been quite a journey. And I feel like a lot of writers will say they have like 5, 10 full length novels that are in a drawer somewhere that are never see the light of day. I also have that many, but they're all the same book.
Okay. So you just started the same book multiple times until you found a version you were happy with?
Yes. You know how it is. You get to the conclusion with the villains monologuing, and you're like, wait, what is his motivation? I was just going
and
for drama at first.
and motivation matters.
Somewhere, yeah, somewhere kind of like in between then and now, about 5 years ago, um,
hmm
I joined the Fellowship of Fantasy Book Club and realized that indie books and self-published fiction is really good. And I could actually also self-publish my novel, and that really encouraged me to pursue that kind of method for getting my book out there. Seeing all these different people that had these amazing book covers and these super awesome teams really inspired me.
That's awesome. So that was going to be my next question: is if you were self-published or going traditional. So you decided to go the self-publishing route,
Hmm.
and what's the biggest challenging for you in figuring all that out?
Well, the good news is I have a background in marketing.
That is good.
That that but it what it does for me is prepares me with exactly how much work it's going to take for me to build an audience. So I'm expecting it to be about 1 to 2 years before I have reached kind of that critical mass of having readers who are following my works. So I know
hmm
that I have to put the work in. Um, I would say that the biggest challenges that I'm facing right now is building trust with readers because I'm a brand new author. I just started publishing my book in September. So building trust with readers and proving to them like this is what I stand for, this is what you're going to find in my stories, and really drawing them in and inviting them to join in the crazy adventures that I'm sharing.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're publishing via web story, or sorry if I don't
Yeah,
didn't
Web
get
Story
that
World.
right. Tell us about that. What is that?
So it's a serialized fiction website that focuses specifically on clean fiction that I started with 3 other authors. And so we're sharing webcomics and serialized stories over on Webster World. Each of us have a different website that we share our different stories on.
Okay. So is it webstoryworld.com or where can people find it?
Hmm. Yeah, if you go to webstoryworld.com, you'll find all of the ongoing stories that we're sharing. And it
So are
runs the
you
gambit from cozy mystery to superheroes to Vikings in
Mhm.
space and some nice fantasy as well.
Yeah, that's quite the broad
Yes,
genres. That's awesome. So is it a subscription service or do people have to pay to have access to those serials or how does what's the model there?
we share all of them for free, but if you want early access to the stories and bonus content, you can sign up for the different Ko-fi subscriptions that we have,
Okay.
starting at $1 a month.
Okay,
Oh,
awesome. So a little bit, but like some of the other sites, like a Patreon or whatever, where you can pay to get special access, but you get access to the actual stories for free. So is
mhm.
it like a chapter drops every week, or it depends on the author? How does that work? the
Depends
serialized
on the
part?
author, but I'm sharing chapters every week. I know that the Jasmine Natasha, who's doing her webcomic, she shares every other week. And then Nathaniel James shares about once a month. He actually does
Hmm.
soundtracks and artwork for each chapter as well, so it does take a little bit
Oh,
longer.
wow. That's
Um,
cool. So and you mentioned that it's all clean content. So how do you
mhm.
gauge that, or how do you manage your um, your ratings, or kind of how do you figure out what is clean and what is not, what's acceptable for the site, and that kind of thing?
So we have kind of a um, set standard for what we consider clean. Anything that goes beyond that, or that it might be a content consideration, like one of my chapters, it's set has a war. So there's
Right.
soldiers and there is death. So I just let them
Hmm.
know, hey, trigger warning, there is going to be a character that dies in this chapter, and things like that. If that's something that they're not comfortable with, they can skip that chapter if they want to. But we focus on having no swear words that are actual, like, swear words that somebody might actually use. They can be made up. That's fine. Um,
Hmm.
and low to no spice, as well
Okay.
as a limit on the graphic nature of the violence in the stories.
Gotcha. So is graphic in that it's got to drive the plot, it's got to be necessary, like not gratuitous, that kind of thing?
Yeah, not no gratuitous violence. If it, I mean, it's superheroes. They're gonna punch somebody into a building,
Right,
but
right.
it's not gonna be like blood going everywhere.
Blood and gore and guts and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
So,
no beheadings, things like that.
mhm. And maybe it will evolve over time as you add more authors or whatever. But like
Hmm.
as we've talked to authors and we've kind of gone down this journey of what is clean and how do you rate it, especially in romance, there are very, very specific levels of like what can be included in to be this level or that level and to be considered sweet or to be considered cozy, and like it can get confusing. There's uh, so many words to use and so many different opinions and values. So with the authors and creators that you have on your site, was that a conversation that you all had together and agreed on something, or is it just you kind of all had the same values to start with, or how do you formalize what is acceptable?
So we have a lot of the similar values. When it comes to these different things. And we had a conversation and we actually wrote out, okay, these are the things that we all agree are not acceptable. We don't want to read this, so we're not going to write that. And then when it comes to anything that might not be covered in those guidelines that we have, um, we'll take it on a case by case basis. We'll discuss it and be like, hey, what do we feel about this? Does it need a warning on it that this is a higher rating? We try to keep it basically PG-13. Lower PG-13 is kind of, the early Marvel movies would kind of be a really good example for kind of our guideline.
Got you. Very and specific to the early Marvel movies.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. And your books are kind of a mix of fantasy and sci-fi, is that right?
Hmm.
So how do you combine those two? Is it made up technology, or are you using like real technology with fantasy characters, or kind of a mix, or how does that work for your stories?
Well, for one, I will try to write purely sci-fi or purely fantasy, but then my
Okay.
brain's like, but what if? Hear me out. What if instead of aliens, they were elves? I'm like, you got a good point there. Or in the case with the Tales from Valamir series, it deals a lot with ancient technology, using kind of obscure and new science facts. That's something that really just really inspires me is um, new and interesting science facts. One of the pieces of technology that actually really inspired kind of the core mechanic of the series is the Superman crystals, where they were able
Hmm.
to basically put like all of the university's data in just to an inch by inch square. They were able to write it on this crystal. And that is one of the core kind of technologies that is throughout the series is crystal based computing. And so, but the main book deals more with the fantasy aspects, the first one. The
Yeah.
second one is going to go more into the technological side.
So it's based on a real technology that's just not very well known, and then you expand upon it in a fantasy world.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how does that world building work for you? Are you like you've got a big map and all these, you know, tying everything together, or how do you world build? Because that can get super complicated.
Well, it's got complicated enough that I just last week started a wiki
Hmm.
and started filling out all that information because I was like, okay, I have too many separate note pages. I'm going to need to actually put this in a way that I can actually search it. So yeah, when it comes to world building, I focus on it more organically as something comes up in the story, and I'm like, hey, I haven't thought about the kind of plumbing that they have because I didn't need to deal with that until I had a scene in the kitchen, or like, oh, okay, do they have an oven? Is it gas? Is it, things like that, and just working on my
Right.
world building piece by piece as it comes up in the story, which after 12 years of multiple drafts, I ended up with lots and lots of opportunities to build the world out.
Hmm. Yeah, I would imagine after 12 years and multiple drafts, a wiki would be necessary to keep it all straight.
And
So is
keep track
that
of which side characters or mentioned characters. Like, okay, did I mention them? Did they have lines? Did they die?
right? You know what? To suddenly be in a scene when he died
I
in
did. I did
the
have a
previous
scene
book.
that one of my beta readers caught. They're like, wasn't this guy in the other country 2 chapters ago? I'm like, I named them the same thing.
You're like, oh yeah, I meant that for sure.
Teleportation.
So
You
one of the others, yeah, one of the other things that you've got on your website is a Story Quest Academy. Can you tell us about that? What is that?
So I actually started a creative writing academy for teens and elementary kids. So we focus a lot on writing short stories and
Hmm.
studying classic books and indie books. I started this because I really enjoy teaching kids and specifically homeschoolers. I started this because I so enjoyed working with all of my siblings. And once they'd all graduated, I was like, wanted to continue teaching kids about creative writing. And this is something I'm really passionate about because as my day job is a lot of copywriting, it having a background in creative writing, especially nowadays with marketing needing to be very creative, this is an essential skill I
Hmm.
feel that kids should have. And I know from experience, um, it's really funny because I hated writing essays. And now for my day job, I basically write essays, articles.
Yeah.
But it's because I was able to focus on the creative side of things and develop my skills, learn grammar, and all the different skills I needed so that when it came to having a practical application, I already learned all those things without any of the upfront objections and being like, oh, this is boring. I'm like, of course I have to learn about adjectives. Somebody told me I need to use less of them.
Yep. So is this something, is this open for any kid to join, or is it specific to homeschool groups, or
Yeah, any
what's
kid
that
can
like?
join in. It's available. I have some free resources on there, and I also have self-paced courses. So I have two of them on there right now. Adventure Quest, which focuses on Peter Pan and Treasure Island, and Mystery Quest, which focuses on Nancy Drew and Hardy Boy's books.
Nice. Love that. Hardy Boys was one of my favorites. Probably it was probably one of my inspirations actually of I read every Hardy Boy book I could get my hands on when I was a kid.
Oh,
Loved
that's
it.
awesome. I was more of a Nancy Drew girl.
Uh, and so when they're diving in kind of into the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, are you giving them prompts to write based on that kind of or
Mhm.
What's the
So basically, the goal
learning
with
like?
the everyone is that we focus on a different skill. So in Adventure Quest, we're focusing on writing an outline and learning how to be able to put those together. What are the different stages of a story? And they are focusing on writing an adventure story. And so they're going to get inspiration from the different books that they read. They get prompts, and then we help them with like editing and completing the story. So giving them just a little bit of tips on that, because I know editing is not everyone's most favorite thing to do, especially when you just finished a story and you're like, yay, I'm done. But just try to get
Right.
them to build on some of these skills. And then with Mystery Quest, we're focusing on mystery. So we're teaching them like what are the tropes of mystery, what are the different stages that you need to have in the story, and we're focusing on building really compelling characters, because I feel like with mystery, um, you really have to have that compelling cast of characters um,
Hmm.
to be able to write a compelling mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. And characters that you care about, but actually a mystery where the clues build upon each other and make sense towards a logical conclusion. And I think it's great that you're using the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, because that's one of their strengths. I believe
Mm-hmm.
is that they're not complicated. They're very fairly simple stories, and there's some unrealistic scenes, and teenagers getting into situations that probably wouldn't happen, especially not now. But the clues and how the mystery is laid out is very logical and makes sense, and it's a great outline, I think, of how to write a good mystery story.
And it
And
helps, I think, with kids being able to analyze these stories. So having a simpler plot is actually helpful in this case. So something like Sherlock Holmes or Agatha Christie, that's like the
mhm,
next step after that, right? That like I could see
right.
the older teens diving into those for sure. But with when it's like elementary kids and younger teenagers, having something that's simple that they're able to clearly see how it works and be able to kind of take it apart and then use those pieces for their own story, I think is really helpful. At least it was for me with writing mysteries and reading lots of mystery novels that were more of that kind of like young adult style.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie too, but especially Agatha Christie, the her entire shtick was you don't know who did it. She creates so much confusion that you don't know who did it until the reveal at the end.
Hmm.
And
Masterful, really.
as a,
I
yeah,
wish I
yeah,
could
she's
write
a
mysteries as
master.
good at that as
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I mean, and she's so good that you could read the same book 10 years later and forget who done it, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but that would be hard for someone in junior high or middle school, that age group, to analyze or figure out, because it's complicated. Like she is the master.
And I think
Um,
that the goal is for my academy is, you know, a lot of people will be like, well, Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys or, Treasure Island, they're not like masterpieces. They're just fun. I'm like, yes. And I want people to have fun, because when you're having fun, they've actually proven that you retain 60% more of the knowledge that you're learning when you're having fun. And so there
mhm.
actually is a reason why these novels have stayed around. And they are good books, even if they're not the most complicated and they're more fun than literary fiction. I still think that there is a benefit to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And and who gets to say what a masterpiece is or a classic is? Like, I think Treasure Island is one because
I
I
agree.
love that kind of book. I love the action and the adventure, and that's one of my favorites. And like that whole time period of adventure books, the Robert Louis Stevenson and all that, and Daniel Defoe, and like that's what I loved as a kid. Those are the things that kept me reading. And I think that whether it's those books or something else, whatever books that keep a kid reading and interested in books is a masterpiece unto itself, because it's doing that job. It's
Exactly.
keeping kids engaged.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And so I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of the goal is love of reading, love of writing. If we can get those two things down, they're going to be able to use those skills later. They're going to be able to take that to, whether they're an engineering student in the future that has to write essays and reports and things like that, or they work in a corporate world where they're having to write all kinds of memos and things like that. Having these skills to be able to communicate effectively, to illustrate your point with metaphors, these are things that you use every day. And so the goal
Hmm.
is for kids to have fun so that they stay engaged. Because I did just about all the different other writing curriculums that there were. I did not like them.
Hmm.
They would, it would be things like they'd ask questions like interview your stuffed animal. That was the prompt that I was supposed to just go crazy on and write 1,000 words. And I was just like, but you said, but you said there was a dark and stormy night, and the lone knight came to the castle. I'm like, oh yeah, I can work with that.
Right. Yeah.
Sparking that imagination and really getting kids to just have fun. And especially, I feel like being able to work with kids that are in elementary age, then going into middle school, because I feel like right as they hit high school, there's this effect where it's like elementary and middle schools, they think they're the best writer that ever has ever been. And then they get to
Yep.
high school and they start to have a little bit more analytical skills. And they realize, oh, maybe not. And I
Hmm.
want to help people to be able to get past that maybe not, because I know that there are so many young writers who, and there's people that I've talked to where they're like, yeah, somebody told me that I was a terrible writer when I was 14. And so I didn't try again until I was, 42. And they're like, I wish I would have, because it turns out that I was just a teenager that was writing a fun story and it wasn't terrible.
Right. Right. And if I think back to that same period, for me, it was that sophomore year of high school when I had that English teacher, the one that was commas, gerund phrases. Like he's the guy who taught me the grammar, the technical aspects, and that's what got me over that hump of
Mm-hmm.
I write for fun. I was getting A's in writing. It's all great to that. Okay, now it's harder. He's the one that taught me this is how you take it to the next level. And at the time, I probably didn't like it so much because it was hard. Like he was a hard English teacher, and up to that point, English had always been easy for me. But he's the guy still today that I can look back and say, I know how to do this because of Mr. Howe, because he taught me this in high school and he got me over that hump. And now, and in college, I would, I would rather write a 30-page paper than take a final exam.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were think that's crazy, but for me, I could knock out a 30-page paper because I loved writing, and way better than studying for a test and doing multiple choice. So, and he was kind of that point in that writing career in the secondary education that really hammered that down for me.
I think that having someone that is encouraging, but also is like, hey, just because you're starting to notice that there are, let's say that you've posted something you wrote online. A lot of teenagers do this nowadays. And then a bunch of
Hmm.
people told you all the things that are wrong with it. And you're like, well, guess I'm just a bad writer. I want to help kids to get out of that mindset that there is such thing as a bad writer. A bad writer is someone who doesn't improve. But if you take an improvement mindset, you see, okay, what can I learn from what they're saying? Obviously,
Hmm.
rant to your friends, cry, then come back a week later,
Hmm.
take a break from it, see what you can do to improve, see what research that you can do. Maybe they say that it's like the writing is flat. I hate that criticism because it's so unhelpful. But the point is, okay,
Yeah,
so
what does that
maybe
mean?
how can you be more descriptive? How can the characters be more dynamic? How can you put more emotion into this? Having those questions and prompts, and we provide feedback with StoryQuest Academy. So I'm actually going to provide them with feedback, and I have a set of questions that either their parents can go over the questions with them or I can. And then it's like, did
Hmm.
you did you do the prompt? Did you, here's the things we worked on this month. How did you do on these? And to just be able to give them kind of an assessment, not a grade, so that they're not like, oh no, I did terrible on this, I'm a terrible person. Because I feel like a lot of writers, our writing is so personal that anytime that anyone says something about like the writing not being as up to their standards or having an error, because I mean, we are human, we're like,
Yeah.
I'm a bad person. And getting people out of that
Yeah.
mindset, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, that's a lesson a lot of adult writers could learn, really. So learning it as a kid is great. I was recently invited to my local high school
Mhm.
to talk to kids at lunch. And so she had kids sign up, and I showed up not knowing if it was going to be one or whatever, but it was a great turnout. Just talked about being an author and books and what it means. Um, but the coolest thing about that whole experience is were all the kids that came up to me afterwards said said I'm writing a book, and you helped me because of this. Or someone said, I'm writing a book and I'm stuck here, what do you think? And I was able to say, well, have you thought about this, or have you considered this, without telling them what to do, just opening up these possibilities of, have you thought about maybe adding a different perspective, a different character's perspective, or connecting these two storylines, and just to see that in their eyes where they were at this block and suddenly it opened up and they were excited to go back home and start writing again. I was so impressed with the kids and their determination and their desire to write. And I'm like, I hope they don't lose that because of criticism. Like, I
Mhm.
hope that sticks with them and they actually get to a point where they either publish that book they're working on or the next book they work on or whatever it is, that they don't have someone tell them that they're horrible, because that fire they've got right now, they need to keep that.
Yep, I totally agree. That's
Yeah.
what really fuels that academy.
So that's awesome. So is there what website should people go to if they're interested in that?
StoryQuestAcademy.com.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So as you're preparing your books for the full publication, you said next year. Is that right?
I'm publishing them chapter by chapter. I should
Mm-hmm.
have the first book completed by next September. This September, then.
So are you going to release paperback versions of those as well, or like full ebook versions?
Yeah, I plan on releasing the ebook and paperback around the same time if I can get the scheduling to work out. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, that's the goal, is to be able to release those in another format. What I'm doing right now is this is my final draft before sending it to an editor. So there is things that are
Okay.
going to be able to change. So it's kind of a pre-publication version, for everybody to be
Mm-hmm.
able to come along with me and enjoy the adventure. And I am having a lot of fun with that for sure.
So do you treat them kind of like beta readers and ask for feedback, or
I'm
do you
absolutely
have a
open
separate
to
thing from that?
feedback, but I do have beta readers separate from that. So that it does go
Okay.
through my alpha and my beta readers first before it is published.
So even the people getting the free content, it's really still a sneak peek. Like, they're still getting early access
Yeah, basically.
to the book. Yeah. Okay. Are you considering creating audiobooks from those as well?
Yes, for sure. That's something that I want to work on. I've already had a couple of people reach out interested in adapting it, and I'm like, I definitely am interested in doing that. Um, More formats to me is more fun. So I have plans to be able to create like some interactive um, fiction, short stories using Twine. I'm actually working on a
Hmm.
short story that I've had for a little while that seemed like it would actually work better in the interactive fiction format. So
Hmm.
doing a lot of different formats to me is really fun because I feel like you get to explore different aspects each time.
Yeah. And the characters take on more depth, and just they come alive when it's out loud. Whether it's just straight audiobook narrating or whether it's more of an adaptation,
Hmm.
it's yeah. And from what I understand, audiobooks are the thing in the industry. Like, that's the most growth is happening in the audiobook world compared to ebooks and paperbacks as well. So
Yeah, I think
that's
that I would
smart.
focus on more of a kind of the old school radio drama style. Um, there was a radio drama that me and my siblings listened to of the Foundation series, and I remember
Hmm.
listening to that. It was so much fun. We had already read the series together. And so we found this and we were like, oh, this would be super fun just to listen to an episode. But like then every night we were like listening to the next episode. And I just remember really enjoying the serialized format and all the sound effects and the different
Yeah.
characters and stuff like that. And it was a different format. It was more of an adaptation, more of a screenplay than
Yeah.
than a direct, just like reading all the descriptions out loud and all of that.
Yeah, that's so much fun. I'm involved in community theater, and we do an old time radio show every
Oh, that's awesome.
Halloween, Friday night. So I write. It's the show is like a live studio audience at the radio station. So you've got they're performing the stories, but then you're also watching them in the studio. As characters, so there's like story within a story, and it's been a lot of fun. It just last year I adapted Sleepy Hollow
Hmm.
for it, and it it's tough to do because you want to. There's so much that you want to add in there, but it has to be either sound effect or dialogue, as you know, and you can
Hmm.
add some narration here and there. But it's so much fun, and we perform that live every year. It's like one I look forward to every year because I just love that format. And I grew up listening. My dad would listen to them because that's what he
Hmm.
listened to as a kid. So I remember like family road trips late at night. That's how you would stay awake. But he would listen to old time radio episodes. So I think that's great. And if you can do that with your books, that's awesome. I mean, it's a whole new audience. It's a whole new group
Absolutely.
of people that you're reaching because everyone has their favorite format and the way they're able to listen and consume. And so I think the more people you can reach, the better.
I agree. I think that
So,
it's been really cool to see how many people who thought that they were not readers turned out they just didn't like sitting and reading a book. They love stories.
yeah,
And I think that I take a little bit of offense to the concept that audiobooks are not real books. I've heard that from some people. It doesn't count as reading.
false.
But here's the thing. How do we start with stories? We sat around a campfire and we told stories, or we were at the local pub
Yeah.
and we heard stories. That's, in my
Yeah.
opinion, the original form of storytelling. The writing it down and putting it in a book and publishing it with a printing press, that's actually fairly modern as far as it goes. So,
Yeah. And frankly, if it weren't for audiobooks, I wouldn't be able to read half of what I read just because working, commuting, I always have an audiobook when I'm doing something else where you can't just walk around with a book in your hand and be
say
rake mowing the lawn, you know,
you
or
can you can
driving to
you can
work or
you
whatever.
can try, but I wouldn't advise it.
Yeah, I would end up running over my foot probably if I tried that. So if you do you have any recommendations of other clean authors that our listeners should check out?
I'll try to limit my list a little bit.
Okay.
I have been reading and participating only for 5 years in this community, but I'm telling you that Fellowship of Fiction Book Club, it really introduced me to so many authors. So I would say
Hmm.
Cam Shia, she does really fabulous fairy tale retellings, and she also has an urban fantasy series that is really popular. Tara
Okay.
Grace, she has the Elven Alliance series, which is very sweet, clean romance with lots of intrigue. Absolutely adore that series. H.L. Burke, she does, right now, she's doing a whole superhero universe that is all about it's like more cozy, I would say, because it's a lot more about those relationships and um, less about the like high stakes. Still lots of drama, but
Yeah.
really, really fun. Let's see. Trying to think of um, H.G. Chambers for his Windwalker series. Really cool world building with mesas and giant raptors instead of like dragon riders. They're raptor riders. That was super
Okay.
fun.
Cool.
And just trying to think of. I could probably think of a bunch more, but those are the ones that are off the top of my head.
Awesome. All right. So w- we're working on getting a list of all of these recommendations and putting a page on our website because we're getting so many great recommendations. It's hard to remember them all. So um, that's, and especially with indie books where it's sometimes harder to find them. It's so great to get recommendations and those new authors that you're not going to see when you walk into a bookstore
Oh yeah.
sitting on that front table, and like you said, I've been doing the same thing since I started writing, trying to find more indie authors, and there's so many great books and great stories there, that it almost makes me it almost makes me frustrated that when you go to Barnes and Noble that they're always recommending the same stuff, and you're like, there's so much good stuff out there. Stop recommending the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Expand.
Oh, for sure. I
So,
would have to say that once I started reading indie fiction, I went from having like these are my three favorite books, and out of 10 books, I will have another one that might be my favorite. To being
mhm.
like, okay, so I have 9 new favorite books and one that wasn't my thing every couple of books. And so it's like the quality. I think a lot of people get this confused with self-publishing where they will think that, oh, because it hasn't gone through like a submission process, it isn't high quality. There can be books with typos out there. Absolutely.
Sure.
But there are so many people who are really putting the work in. They're getting their stuff professionally edited. They're getting professional covers. I mean, the Elven Alliance series, for an example, they had some covers that weren't really doing the series justice. So she did a Kickstarter and recovered the whole series, and she's gotten like a whole new wave of readers because we do judge a book by its cover. But
Sure.
it is such a fabulous series. And yes, sometimes authors have to bootstrap their series. But the amount of world building that I see that's so unique, it's just been so interesting. I feel like a lot of the stories that I was reading in the genres that I was reading in felt kind of like the same thing. They felt like they were very similar because when a publishing house is publishing and looking for something that's like, okay, this did really well, let's find 5 other ones that are exactly like this. And so
Yeah.
going into indie fiction, the sky's the limit. You can make, your elves can be completely different than this person's elves, and they can be a totally different culture. And you don't have to have this content or that content or make this point or that point. You get to choose what the message is, and you get to be able to share your unique perspective. And I think that that's what I enjoy a lot is seeing these interesting cultures and worlds that everyone is coming up with and getting to enjoy everyone's perspectives on the world.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Well, we are about out of time. It's been so much fun. Thank you so much for being here, and it's been a great conversation. So I need to get to your two truths and a lie,
Okay.
and I didn't ask you any trick questions, because we were so I was so engaged in the conversation. That seems to always happen to me. So to review, I'm an avid hiker and once hiked 20 miles to see an amazing view. Um, 2, my bedroom was once inside an old bank vault. And 3, I'm allergic to alfalfa hay but want to raise sheep. Hmm. Like, there's not a whole lot in the conversation that helps me with these. Um, that the bank vault's a pretty specific one, so either that's that the fiction writer in you coming out, or it's strange enough that it has to be true. So I'm gonna go with I'm allergic to No, 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 no. I'm gonna change my mind. I'll go with number 1 is the lie. The avid hiker is the lie.
That would be correct. I am not.
Yes.
But yeah, I did actually have my bedroom was a bank vault. It was actually like an old 1920s one. My dad worked in construction for 20 years, and one of the projects he worked on was converting a super old bank into a storefront and then a apartment in the back. And the bank vault ended up being the
Super cool.
bedroom.
Super cool. All right. Cool. That's a cool little fact. So today we're going to introduce Steve, who is our scorekeeper. So I get to add another number to me. All right. So we'll keep Steve keeping score for us. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. It's been a great conversation. Please check out those sites that we talked about and support Amelia in her work. Follow along as she drops the story throughout the next year. Really excited to see where they go and all the different formats she comes out with. So thank you for listening. Please share, please subscribe, and we will catch you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.